We have an incredible panel of experts lined up to talk about one of the biggest topics in the electric sector today, artificial intelligence and energy demand. The title of the panel is Grid Locked or Grid Unlocked. Get it? Yeah, it's good. I don't know. If that doesn't make sense to you yet, hopefully it will in the next hour and a half or so that we have together. We'll be getting into questions of grid constraints and opportunities, implications of AI and data centers for the climate and the environment, as well as potential solutions, including how to ensure that consumers are protected amidst this change. So let me introduce our esteemed panelists, and then we'll get into it. Starting all the way on the right, David Fernandes leads product strategy for SoftBank Energy, which is a US-based renewable energy developer and independent power producer. Prior to SoftBank Energy, David spent 5 years at Microsoft, where he led clean energy and decarbonization programs in the data center business. So he knows this topic well. Elise Torres is the assistant managing attorney at the Utility Reform Network, known as TURN, where for the past decade, she has advocated for residential ratepayers at the California Public Utilities Commission on a wide variety of issues, including rate design for data centers and new large loads, as I understand it. Skyler Holloway is the Vice President of Strategy and Portfolio at Switch, which is a leading designer, builder, and operator of data center campuses. Previously, Skyler spent 5 years at Meta, where he helps plan and execute ground-up campus center developments and co-location build-outs to support Meta's data centers globally. So also a broad range of experience around AI and data centers here on our panel. And last but not least, Gillian Clegg is the Vice President of Energy Policy and Procurement at Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E, our electric service provider right here in San Francisco, also the epicenter of so much AI development. And of course, PG&E is the electricity service provider to much of Northern California, including Silicon Valley, maybe the original home of the data center. In her role, Gillian is responsible for planning, procurement, and management of all of PG&E's gas and electric supply, as well as for PG&E's policy positions relating to energy procurement and wholesale market design. So you can see we have a really broad swath of the data center and electric industry represented here today, and I could not be more excited to dive in. So let's start with just a reality check. Maybe David, Skyler, I want to ask you first. The AI industry, cloud computing generally, it seems to have an insatiable demand for power. E3, other analysts, we've tried to pin down some of these growth numbers. We're seeing estimates of between 30 to 60 gigawatts of new power demand in the US over the next 5 years alone, right? And for context, a nuclear power plant might be 1 to 2 gigawatts. So this is a rapidly evolving industry, right? We see a lot of growth, but we also know there's new business models emerging. It seems like every week, new algorithms, new chip design, opportunities for efficiency, global competition from companies like DeepSeek in China. So what are you both actually seeing in the market? Is the data center demand, is it still red hot? Are we really going to double demand over the next 5 years? Or are you seeing any signs of slackening or any signs of a bubble in this hype cycle?
Okay, I'll start off. Well, thanks for kind of putting forth the size of the market that we're seeing, which is sort of unprecedented across the data center space. I'll offer that if you listen to Jensen and coming from NVIDIA, if you look at the total addressable market that they're building chips for, it does substantiate and does back up those numbers. And those are the numbers that I've heard in aggregate from the largest buyers and builders of data center capacity. So the supply side is definitely working to meet that amount of data center growth across primarily the US, but certainly the globe to support mostly generative AI workloads, but also some growth of traditional cloud.
Okay, so still red hot. All right.
Certainly still growing. And we can chat a little more on sort of, I think the market is entering a little more of a maybe intelligent buying phase, but the demand is still certainly there.
Yeah. What about you, David? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of add on as a developer, we see a little bit of frothiness in the marketplace right now. Definitely just inflated prices for M&A opportunity, But I just saw a report from Bloomberg Energy Finance on Friday that said 78 gigawatts by 2035. So the numbers just kind of keep ratcheting up. We're pretty confident that, but let's not say 100% of that capacity will probably come online, because I think over the next couple of years, we'll definitely see efficiencies in a lot of this technology as well. This was something that we saw in the cloud business, over the last, decade and a half or so, whereas there was this belief that energy would just kind of grow substantially with data center demand. But over the years, new, more efficient energy data centers were developed, more efficient energy technologies. I think we'll start to see a little bit of that with the AI space. I would also say that there's a lot of, I don't want to call it fake demand out there, but when you see a lot of, I would say, smart money with new developers that are announcing projects with no tenants, a lot of the times I think that's a little bit of a red flag of a speculative type of development. And we haven't really seen speculative developments that successful in the data center space. Typically, you need to be pretty buttoned up, tightened up with the tenant specifications, build your data center to the tenant specifications in a way. So I think some of it is definitely a bit frothy, but I think overall that base level demand is there. And I would say it's still pretty red hot.
Yeah. All right. Great. Well, Gillian, I'm curious, at PG&E, how much of your time are you, spending planning and procuring energy for data centers? And then I'm also curious, how do you deal with the inherent uncertainty of this industry as you're making, 20-year or 30-year investments, or, signing long-term power purchase agreements?
Yeah, I'll start with what we are seeing as far as applications coming in the door, and I would still classify it as, red hot from where I sit. And I'm not the interconnection people. I think someone's going to fix that sound issue. But what we have shared publicly already, and this is below everything that's come in the door, because we've run a couple of clusters to ask people, where do you want, hey, data centers of the world, well, of Northern California, come and tell us where you want to connect. And we have about 5,500 megawatts that have come in so far. We have about 4,000 of that is still kind of in the early assessment and planning, but 1,400 of that is in final engineering already, and 50 megawatts of that is under construction. And this is all, by the way, they want to be online by 2030. So for those of you, it's massive, right? And we get the question a lot of like, are people really going to build this in California? The rates are so high. Is that really economic? Won't they go to a state where it's cheaper? And somebody who knows more about this will probably explain why they need to be in California, why they need to be in Silicon Valley. A lot of this is showing up in San Jose. Mm-hmm. So one of the things we're doing to address the uncertainty on the interconnection request side is we filed a new tariff with our commission for approval, which would require the data centers to post the money first to cover all the interconnection costs, so that they have some skin in the game and they can get paid back that money when their load shows up and they start generating revenue that's coming in, because now they're a customer that is paying a bill. And so we're hoping, and this idea has been favorably received by the data center community as well. And I think it's one of the ways that we're trying to make sure that the speculative folks don't come. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the folks who are putting real money into it.
Real projects going to be there for the long term. Yeah. And then turning to you, Elise, I'm curious, how are you at Turn thinking about data center development in California from a consumer or ratepayer perspective? I don't know if you see these real loads. Are you worried that they may or may not be there for the long term?
Yes, definitely concerned about, is all this load actually going to materialize? Certainly don't want to have a lot of very expensive infrastructure being built that's not going to get utilized. So we want to make sure we get firm commitments and long-term commitments as well. But I think, I've never seen load growth like this in my career. I know it's really a PG&E issue in California that I'm seeing. Well, I only work on investor-owned utilities. I should caveat that. I know Silicon Valley Power down in the South Bay has a ton of data center load. But PG&E is really the investor-owned utility in California that's having the most. I know SCE has a little bit in the pipeline, they think, but it's really up here in the Bay Area where we're seeing it. And it's really clustered, as Gillian said, and that creates a lot of constraints on the infrastructure system, on the transmission system, and that's going to cause a lot of downstream cost impacts too.
And then just another level setting question, I would be remiss if I didn't ask about some of the volatility that we're seeing in the markets right now, policy uncertainty, tariffs, are they on, are they off? How is that affecting your projects or your procurement? I don't know if anyone can comment there, maybe Skyler or David, Gillian.
Not good. Yeah. I mean, I think generally speaking, we haven't seen yet the rug get pulled out on projects, but I think just it's created just an aura of uncertainty in the market, which is challenging for a company like us that relies on things like IRA and a lot of the incentives that have been developed in Inflation Reduction Act for renewable development. So we see a lot of challenges there. We know it's going to be a pretty hefty situation for them to actually overturn IRA, but nothing's impossible, I guess. And so I would say we haven't seen that rug get pulled out yet, but we just see a lot of a little bit of uncertainty.
Yeah, I would share. I think in the early days I was worried about the IRA, because that's large. But I feel less worried about that going away because I think there's a lot of support for it across red and blue states. But I think the tariffs on imported goods is where we're seeing more of the issue right now with like open solicitations that we have and like people having a hard time really pinning down a price they're willing to stand behind. I mean, we're signing contracts that are 10, 15, 20 years. They may not have procured everything yet. And yet they're trying to give me a fixed price that they can stand behind and that I'm going to hold them to. So it has caused a bit of grief in the procurement space for me anyways.
Yeah, I would largely agree with both of those. That it means less sleep because there is a lot of refiguring and rereading contracts and looking at the potential exposure to things like the escalation in the cost of steel for construction projects, or are you looking at renegotiating with a large OEM vendor of switchgear because of the price of copper and maybe how it's escalated. So it has caused a lot of sort of rethinking around what could happen. There's also such uncertainty around how things will end up and settle when it comes to tariffs that it's a bit of a planning exercise until things become better understood. But it's, I would say, causing a bit of unnecessary replanning and rethinking.
And for projects that want to connect between now and 2030, like any kind of uncertainty or delay means that the generation doesn't get to the market and maybe the load gets there first and you have an out of balance situation.
Yeah, well, that's a good tie-in to the climate implications of all of this demand and where is this power going to come from? What's going to serve this power? How's it going to be delivered? So I guess first I wanted to just ask the question, what do the data centers actually need and want in terms of power? Is it 24/7 power with 5 nines of reliability still, or are you seeing any differentiation of that where it depends on what data center we're talking about? What's the application? What's the compute need? Or is this really just 24/7 firm power that is needed? I don't know. Maybe Skyler or David.
Sure, I'll go for it. I think for the first time in 15 years, data centers are asking themselves that question for a few reasons. One, the challenges with getting additional power. 2, we're at a point of inflection around data center design. GPUs specifically run hotter and have more volatility in their load than the aggregate traditional cloud workload. And I would say over the last 5 years, even before the AI boom, hyperscalers in particular were starting to sort of reassess their design, that if they could abstract more into the software stack, then they could take a less redundant data center, which to them meant that they no longer had to build 2N systems for everything, and they could remove some of the capital expenditure for a data center campus or program. So that was kind of in the works, but it has absolutely been focused on even more so since AI, in part that cloud availability was expected to be 5 nines of uptime. Users always wanted to get to their data. They always wanted it, at arm's length, just immediately available. And with larger training models, it's being questioned. I would say that the jury is still out, in my opinion. David can provide another perspective, but with large training models, you can benchmark them effectively so that you can suffer some type of downtime. And the difference between 5 nines of downtime and 3 nines of downtime, I think, goes from maybe 8 minutes to 12 hours a year of downtime. So they're still very robust systems. But there is, it's being reconsidered, because on the other side of this kind of argument that's happening within the data center industry is saying, well, if you build $1 billion data center, but you put $15 billion of hardware in it over the lifetime of that data center, say it was 20 years, downtime can really add up from unused hardware, because that really is what makes the decisions in data centers. It's not ultimately the facilities themselves, it's the availability of the hardware that's within them.
That's where all the capital expenses.
Yeah, maybe just to add on, I think we've seen a couple of decoupling trends, I would say, from traditional development criteria. One has been that there was really this drive to build in the primary, secondary data center market. So big cities, places like Northern Virginia, Silicon Valley, Chicago, places like that. Companies seem more open to go to more remote places, which I think is unique from a renewable developer perspective, because that gives the opportunity to co-locate with utility scale solar, batteries, wind, other types of resources. You actually have the land at reasonable cost to be able to do that. And part of that decoupling seems to be, and maybe Skyler can touch more on this, but maybe not as high of a reliance on latency as hyperscale cloud applications or IT workloads used to be. We're also seeing an interesting willingness to co-locate with generation, which was very much a no-go like 4 or 5 years ago. When I spent time at Microsoft, we did get pitched a lot to go and build a data center right next to a power plant, and that wasn't really part of our interest at that time. And so we're seeing like a little bit more openness to that. You see the Talon Energy AWS deal, for example, where there's a co-located data center next to a nuclear plant, and I think we'll see more of those type of projects continue to be developed. And Skyler touched on this as well, but we're also seeing less of a ask for 5 nines of reliability or 5 nines of availability. I think that's driven a lot by AI training, not having that same type of uptime requirement. And then that gives the opportunity to get rid of diesel generators, if that's the case, which diesel generators have really been just kind of a thorn in the side of the data center industry for years. Don't get utilized much, stranded capital, just increase the capex of the projects. And of course, you need to have all the air quality permits that are required for it. So those 3 decoupling trends, I think, are pretty interesting in the space right now.
Well, I know, David, that you develop a lot of solar and storage projects. Is that sufficient firm power for data centers, or are they still using backup generation?
So I would maybe phrase it a bit differently, in the sense that solar and storage alone is very expensive, let's say, to get to 24/7 today. We'll see that cost come down over time, and we're pretty confident that cost will come down. But we still see data center companies want to have an electric grid connection. So, we have some creative ways to, firm up co-located loads with solar, with storage, but still that electric grid connection is tough for them to get away from. So I would say I think we'll see potentially more islanded projects in the future, but today it's still going to be co-located solar, storage plus a grid connection is what it seems to be trending towards.
What about the other sources for this power demand? How worried should we be about mothballed coal plants being turned back on to serve this load, or a build out of new coal or gas generation? Skyler, is that something we should be worried about from a climate perspective?
I won't speak for the industry at large, but at Switch, we've procured 100% renewable energy since 2016. Yeah. It was in our DNA, and it's something that was important to us. But I will say that certainly the industry, the most important thing for data center power is when can it be online. That really does drive the current decision making, even if it's bridging power that is only in place for a certain number of years until we can move on to more sustainable sources down the line. But the most available and soonest to market power is what I think most decisions are being made around at the moment.
And I would add, time to market is kind of the ultimate card there. And I think the data center industry is really taking that kind of all of the above approach. You see, the nuclear deals coming out. You see certain hyperscalers building, in new states that require gas generation to go along with it. And at the same time, signing very large solar VPPAs and buying carbon offsets. So I really think it's all of the above, and it's really about how do you get power as quickly as possible right now.
I heard Julio Friedman say that the 5 most important factors were speed, cost, and climate. I don't know if that's an accurate representation or if you changed the order there, but I thought that was clever. What about you, Elise? Are you worried about the climate implications, or are our state policy goals sufficient to ensure that this doesn't become a climate disaster?
I'd say I'm worried. I mean, thankfully here in California, we have a pretty good mix of resources already, but I worry about running our gas-fired power plants longer, more hours, especially with this overnight load. The 24/7 data center load is just different than what we've been planning for, what the grid's really built for. So I worry about gas-fired power plants in low-income communities that already have air quality impacts running more and impacting those communities. But I think, well, Gillian can probably speak to this better than me, but I've heard Diablo Canyon might be running longer as a result of all of this. But I also worry about meeting the state's overall electrification goals if we get to a place where we don't have enough electrification or electricity to support EVs and building decarbonization, because all of our excess power has gotten soaked up.
What do you think, Gillian? Should we be worried? Are PG&E's climate goals at risk? Renewable targets at risk, or state electricity climate goals?
So many thoughts. So what we see is, if we focus on this time period between now and 2030, which seems very critical, right? Speed to market is very critical. We've heard that. And so what is going to serve this load? It's probably going to be what's already connected to the grid in the near term. You can't bring on new build generation of any kind, even if you wanted to build a new gas plant, which nobody is proposing. You can't do that in a year or 2 years or even 3 years or 5 years. So we see, and we've done some math, and it looks like there is some, let's say, excess capacity or fat in the system at the CAISO level to serve incremental load in the near term. But I do think it would likely result in gas plants running more. And so that is a risk. I think that the climate goals don't allow for that. The climate goals are very strict and ambitious and challenging still. We at our company are well positioned to serve the load that we have and meet our goals, but I'm not sure that's the case statewide. So I think that is a legitimate concern.
In California, we're aiming for a 40% reduction statewide in the next 5 years and net zero by 2045. The rest of the country is not operating under that same regime. I don't know, what are you seeing in terms of how this new development is being met? You mentioned, Skyler, that it's 100% clean. What is serving those loads? Is it solar and storage and offsets, or how are you getting there?
Yeah, frankly, everything, like David said, it's very much driven by what can I bring on when? How can we serve the large clients that are running the artificial intelligence loads? And ultimately, what is their preference? And time to market is still sort of the driving part there. Yeah. And I'll provide kind of an example that I think maybe helps understand at least their perspective on the importance of having power now. I think Google's revenue last year was like $350 billion, and almost 200 billion came from search. And if you look at traditional search, where you are looking through a bunch of blue links that have been indexed based on their popularity and how many people go to them, and then you've queried ChatGPT to give you a response, and it did the work for you, and it gave you the answer. And you've, as a consumer, looked at both of those. And, at least in my experience, sometimes ChatGPT or an artificial intelligence language model can give me a better result. You can understand how, perhaps from Google's perspective, they see $200 billion of annualized revenue in an existential threat scenario. And so for them, getting access to compute, which you need power for the compute, is ultimately how they can try to defend that business and stay ahead of what they see as a generational technology. And because of that, to look at they're looking at the longer term in terms of how to stay on top of that. And it means that time to market is still the driving rationale behind any power they can get a hold of.
Yeah, and maybe just to add on to that, I think when a lot of this came out a couple of years ago, maybe really over the last 18 months, you heard a lot of the hyperscalers say, capital is kind of our moat in this industry, so to speak. And that trend really hasn't slowed down. You still see all the hyperscalers committing fairly large CapEx to data center builds. And I think it really points to Skyler's point that they want to get their computers in the ground as quickly as possible and start training models, because they absolutely see these new AI companies that have come up, and they see them as a threat to their core business. And 200 billion out of 350 billion is a significant
big number. Yeah. So the business model talks. The hyperscalers also have their own really ambitious climate targets. We've seen the headlines about investments in emerging clean technologies like small modular nuclear reactors, CCS, enhanced geothermal, tying those together with data centers. Are you bullish on that? Will this new, very motivated capital enable these technologies to finally achieve commercialization? I don't know, maybe Gillian, what do you think?
That would be great.
That would be great.
I'm also of the opinion that we need an all of the above strategy, that there's no one smoking gun that's sitting out there that's going to solve all our problems. So if we can use some companies who have a lot of extra money to, further certain technologies, especially if they're base load and we need to serve a lot of base load, that'd be great. I'm not sure about the future of nuclear in California. I mean, there's a moratorium on new nuclear in the state now, so obviously that would need to be changed. But I do, there's a lot of people working on that. I don't see it really before next decade, though. So while it could be a great longer term solution, I don't think it's solving our immediate problem, say, in the next 5 years.
Yeah, I would say I'm pretty bullish on these companies driving a lot of adoption. I think if you look at the history of them, they were the first kind of voluntary buyers of a lot of the products that are produced in the renewables industry today. They drove the adoption of things like VPPAs, for example, at scale. And I think the other part about it is, if you still look at the list of corporate buyers, who buys the most clean energy in the US, it's the hyperscalers. And so I don't see that trend going away anytime soon. And again, as a developer, when we work with these companies, they want clean energy. I mean, that's kind of their ideal mix, I would say, but they also have this mandate of time to market. So if we can match up renewable deployments and new technology development at the scale and the speed that they're looking for, I think that's where we'll start to see a lot more adoption, a lot more success. And nuclear SMRs are a hot topic in the industry, of course, right now as well.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite emerging technology in this lineup, Skyler?
No, I don't.
Not picking winners, picking favorites? No.
I like utility scale solar. It's pretty.
Pretty good, yeah.
Skyler,
Any other fans of utility scale solar?
We call that talking your book.
All right. Well, I'm curious, Elise, what do you think the regulators should play? What role should the regulators play, if any, here, both in terms of procurement for clean power, or also the risk that the data centers may not be there for 20 or 30 years, or I don't know, maybe that's not a big risk.
Yeah, it's hard to know, I guess, how big of a risk that is. I've heard conflicting points of view on that, but what is real is the cost. PG&E is estimating between $500 million and $1.6 billion per gig of service. So that's pretty massive amount of costs. And people in this room probably know we're in a kind of electric rate affordability crisis here in California, especially for investor-owned utilities. The rates have gone up. They've doubled in 10 years. They've gone up 75% in the past 5 years. And I really think we're reaching an unsustainable level for a lot of residential ratepayers. So in turn, we're really concerned about any of these costs getting shifted to particularly residential ratepayers, but I think all existing customers. So that's going to be a huge role for the regulator to make sure, the tariff is designed properly, making sure that any infrastructure that's built gets utilized and is paid for by the data centers up front. Unfortunately, transmission service upgrades, at least PG&E's interpretation of the FERC rules is that those cannot be collected up front, and those are some of the biggest costs. So that'll be something to think about going forward. And then also making sure, we're not, Turner's very concerned about clean energy. So we want to make sure we don't mess up California's great clean energy mix. Like to see, long-term contracts being signed for clean resources, but it's a nationwide problem, and we all know who's who's the president right now. I heard Google's CEO at Congress today saying we want all the power. We don't care where it comes from. So, climate change doesn't matter where you're generating the carbon. So if coal-fired power plants are running longer, I do really worry about the climate implications of that. So I hope we're being powered by clean energy, and I do see a huge potential role for investment in battery technology. Really the cost of batteries has been our big problem here in California, but if we're getting this kind of investment, I think we do have the potential to drive down those costs and just get a huge efficiency gain if we can get the technology right.
I wonder about other solutions. There's been a lot of talk about the potential for load flexibility from data centers, either on a geographic basis or a temporal or operational flexibility basis. Those are big questions that have come up, and I'm wondering, how bullish are you on the ability to, operate these data centers more flexibly to match demand, match supply? Is that just a pipe dream, or is that a real potential for cost savings or environmental benefits?
We're trying hard.
Yeah.
There's way more focus on load curtailment or peak shaving, and how we can do that at the data center, be it longer midterm storage, or some type of peak shaving or peak production of your own power. Really, everything's on the table. It is a new sort of paradigm for the data center industry. But the time incentives, the cost incentives of pursuing it now are really causing all of the large companies to consider it.
Is it like 10% load flexibility, 50%? How much are we talking about?
Yeah, good question. I don't know if I could put a number on it, but I think it's generally to shave peaks when it's most advantageous to the grid. For the most part, data center loads are fairly consistent. There is different fluctuations from AI workloads rather than cloud, but it probably wouldn't be massive in terms of just the data center, because of it just means it's a lot of either storage or generation that you're building that's only used a certain amount of time.
Sure, yeah.
But it can be done in ways that will sort of remove some of the stress that happens to the grid when everyone's using
More of
all
that
of their
peak
power.
demand shaving, perhaps. Yeah. I don't know, Gillian, do you see anything about the shape of this demand where you sit?
Yeah, California has a peak load problem. It's concentrated in the evenings right now, especially with so much behind the meter solar, a big dip in the middle of the day and a big ramp up until the evening when the sun is setting. So to the extent, some number of days, more days, the better, that we could have flexibility in those super peak, the needle peak hours of the day would be great. I haven't heard much willingness to do that, but I think that could be, a really big unlock to not adding to the peak that we already have, and then you need to build out peak resources to serve a very needle peak. In the EV space, we are looking at, this is a problem we've been thinking about for some time, and to basically try to move any kind of load, but like load that's easier to manage than others would be like EVs, and move it into the middle of the day where we have this big glut. So it's something that we've thought about a fair amount and think there could be some real value there.
I don't know, David, are you seeing anything about just peak shaving, or is that?
I would say talk of it, but not
talk.
Yeah, a lot of talk as of right now, but not a lot of implementation. I think there was a thought when AI training applications were first starting to be rolled out that there was a little bit more of a flexible nature with them, where you would be able to kind of be a bit more grid interactive and kind of quote unquote a good grid citizen, so to speak. But I think what we started to see is this trend of AI training workloads almost being cited right next to cloud and inference workloads, which then still makes that campus in a way inflexible, right? So maybe you have some flexibility within a building in a data center campus, but the campus is still looking like a 24/7, kind of steady load operation. So
not co-locating it with any crypto, because the crypto mining is supposedly most flexible. Is that right?
Different. And that's a good point to bring up, because a lot of crypto miners have now turned into AI data center developers, especially in Texas. So that is
entrepreneurial.
Yeah, exactly. It's absolutely a trend that we're seeing in the industry, where a couple of people in a truck have started up a crypto mine, and they've been able to convert that into an AI data center, which is pretty impressive. I think it also kind of opens up some new interesting ways to develop some of this infrastructure that was developed, as kind of critical infrastructure in the past. But now, if you have small companies with interconnection position that are able to build an AI data center, that's pretty interesting.
So the cloud compute needs 100% uptime essentially, but the jury's still out on whether these inquiries, these inferences could be shifted a little bit in time. Is that what I'm hearing? Yeah, okay. Great. Well, we've talked a bit about the climate impact, some of the potential solutions. I also want to talk a little bit about some of the other community impacts from data centers. E3, we recently looked at this for the state of Virginia, for the Virginia Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission, JLARC. Of course, you mentioned Northern Virginia is the epicenter of data center development. I think the largest data center loads in the world over there. And what we found there is that while there's a lot of positive benefits from property tax revenue, some high-paying construction jobs, there was also a lot of kind of community unrest with some of the pace of that development. And we didn't see actually any cost shifts to customers in Northern Virginia today, but looking forward, the growth and the demand was just anticipated to lead to a lot of competition for scarce resources that could lead to real cost increases for everyone on the grid. So, that's what we were seeing in Northern Virginia. I'm curious, Elise, what are you seeing or hearing, here in Silicon Valley, here in Northern California?
I think I've been looking at Silicon Valley Power's situation, trying to learn from that as PG&E is starting to scale up and become a new data center hub, or at least a provider of electricity for data centers. And so in Silicon Valley Power's service territory, I think 60 to 70% of their load is data centers. And they've seen huge rate increases in the past couple of years. And they're saying that's due to data centers. So I know there's some upset over that. I think that I've read some articles about people not being thrilled about this, pretty large windowless warehouse going up right up against a, residential neighborhood. The noise implications, I worry a bit about water usage. It's great to site them near solar, but here in the West, we have a water shortage problem. So I do worry a little bit about that. And then, I think a lot of the problem is there's not a ton of local benefits to the community. Once it's built, those construction jobs are gone. There's not a lot of people working there, and business taxes are based off how many employees you have. So there's not a lot of business tax benefit. There's no sales tax benefit. So if you're really looking from a city operations point of view, there's not necessarily, you're losing a lot of land to data centers, but you're not necessarily getting a lot of revenues for your city and for city services. So I think that's a big concern.
I don't know, Gillian, are you seeing or hearing anything different in Silicon Valley about, whether customers, I don't want to lose my mic here. Are we back? Is that okay? All right, whether, customers want these data centers in their communities, don't want them, are being affected in any way?
I am not too connected into that
Okay,
particular topic. The cost shift piece, we're very worried about. Definitely, we've spent years and years trying to get the rates correct for net energy metering, for example. Big cost shift, as we all know, on from those who have solar panels on the roofs to those who don't. And so that is a very ripe conversation that we're having daily internally. So yeah, definitely aligned with Elise on not wanting to shift costs from one customer to the other and making sure they pay their fair share.
Well, we've been talking a lot about the negative sides. I think there's also real questions around whether AI can unlock massive productivity and the 4-day work week for all of us, or national security concerns as well, right? So I don't know, how do we balance that, the massive upside that could come from some of these very local concerns? I don't know, is that...
I don't do any work anymore. I just AI does it.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Yeah?
I'm not sure.
All right. Well, we can ponder that one. This one might be another question for you, Elise. At E3, we talk a lot about the electric grid as a swimming pool, right? Utilities, finance, the cost to build and maintain the pool, and then we have a lot of fish swimming in that pool. Some little fish, some medium-sized fish, even some big fish. But then we have these data centers, right, that are the size of an entire power plant, the size of a small municipal utility. And so they're a lot more like a whale than a guppy, right? And so it kind of raises the question, does the whale even belong in the pool with the rest of us? Should the data centers just directly interconnect to the generation or co-locate behind the meter of the nuclear facility? Should they just own and operate their assets? What role should the utility play, when maybe the financing role that the utilities have traditionally played isn't needed in this case? I'm curious, if Elise, you have thoughts, so I'd love to hear your thoughts as well afterwards, Gillian, as well.
Yeah, I mean, we'd love to see more kilowatt hours being sold. That's in theory going to put downward pressure on rates because utilities have fixed costs to operate the system, and the more electricity sales that's spread over, in theory, rates could go down. The problem with data centers right now, at least my understanding, is most of them connect at the transmission level. And so we collect here in California most of our kind of societal costs, wildfire mitigation work, wildfire liabilities, insurance, environmental programs, all through distribution rates. So if data centers are just paying transmission rates, they're bypassing all those kind of the contribution to those societal costs. And so that's where a really properly designed tariff would be a lot better than the situation we have right now. I know PG&E is working on one, which is great, but that's our big concern with the transmission level connection.
I don't know. What do you think, Gillian?
I mean, the co-location topic is very hot, and there's going to be a big, open conversation at FERC about that, and who pays what, and how much do they still pay if they want to stand by rate, make sure that their impact is mitigated on the grid. There's other things that we're trying to tackle as far as affordability and taking things off the utility bill, right? We've had a history of just putting things through utility bills because it's easier than getting a 2/3 vote to pass a new tax rate in California. And so some of that kind of work still needs to be done, and to take things out of rates that are not necessarily costs that we are actually incurring on behalf of everybody who pays the bill. So just a side thought there on affordability.
Sure. No, David, Skyler, does it make sense for the utility to be the middleman on power procurement here, or is the future data centers build, own, operate their own power?
Well, I can comment on that. I think when you said balance, I think that's a really important word in this context. That absolutely a lot of Elise's concerns, we do need to make sure that new loads and new interconnect is fair. But we also want to make sure that we are enabling growth. And if it's like the growth is done in such a rigid way, like data centers, like water will flow to the place where there's less resistance. So we could have a ton of data center growth in East Texas, and they can all do it on their own, and there will be no benefit to any communities, except in a very concentrated area, which I wouldn't say is a U.S. level positive outcome, because it's focusing and concentrating it all in a specific area. But there are places that are better for data centers versus not. So like very populated city locations where land is at a premium, maybe is not the best spot for a data center. But I think that it is an opportunity that is a generational opportunity, not meaning generation of power, but just the opportunity itself. And I've seen it happen in places where it made sense. I lived in Central Oregon and built and operated a data center for Meta in Prineville. And Prineville, post the global recession, had 30 or 40% unemployment. It was a location that had previously been a factory that had closed. People were just so wanting for opportunities that it was very consistent to hear before a data center was built there, and then multiple other companies followed with more data centers, that our kids can't stay here. They can't stay with our way of life. And the development that happened there gave high-paying jobs that, as a commitment to the county, were 25 or 50% over the median job in the county before, and made sure to do community programs that also benefited the local community. Things like iPads for all of the kids in the school, or funding the development of mountain biking trails and things of that nature that, sure, it could have never happened there if there wasn't some level of balance of, we have, space and land and power that's being unused. Let's make sure we can put that towards growth, but let's also do it in an intelligent way that benefits all of us here.
Yeah, and just to add on, I think all very great points. And as developers, we're out talking to communities all the time, and I think it's a very, I would say it's a varied opinion on it. If you go to a place like Northern Virginia, there is a little bit of resistance, pushback, because the amount that has been developed in that area over the last several years. But if you go to a rural community and talk to them, they're welcoming the data center to come to the community. I mean, to some of Skyler's points, I think Prineville is a great example of that. But a lot of these towns have existing infrastructure, they have population, but they don't have jobs. And so in a lot of these towns, people are commuting hour and a half to go to work, and they'd love to have a tech company come and build a facility in their region and help reinvigorate it. So we see a lot of excitement from communities to bring data centers. That also opens up challenges, because now you're working with smaller electric co-ops that maybe have never had experience with siting that type of load before. But then you kind of have to balance that against going into a very saturated region and trying to get a load approval over there. So I think there's pluses and minuses of both, but we definitely see a lot of pull from communities where they want these facilities built.
What are the drivers that make it work to locate in a rural location versus being, right in the center of the population load, or where the programmers are based?
What's driving it now is access to power. So if
Okay,
you can get
yeah.
scaled power with a reasonable land, rural communities are kind of a great place to go. I think some of the constraints are, and maybe Skyler could talk about, it's like around fiber connectivity, which was a constraint in the past, but you can build fiber, and it's easier to build fiber than it is transmission lines. So.
Is that also what you're seeing as the constraint, is the power more than the fiber or the latency?
Yeah, it used to be like there was a list of 10 things to be considered that I could talk through, like they're waiting, and now it's just when's power online.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, but yeah.
We're talking about the right topic then. All right. Well, I have one more question, and then I want to open it up to the audience. But I want to, think about the future. How could we, make this into a win-win for everybody, right? You know, and so if you could think of one thing that we could do, ideally now, today, that would put AI and data centers on a good path, a sustainable path for the grid and for the climate, what would that be? What's one thing that could help us get this right at this very critical juncture?
I mean, I'll start off. I think it's just collaboration. So having the data center companies, the hyperscalers, really work in collaboration with the utilities, with the co-ops, to potentially bring new generation with the load that when they're bringing it to a new region. I think that hasn't really been something that's been thoughtful in the past. It hasn't really been one of the criteria when you're looking at development. But I think just given the strain that we're in right now, I think that collaboration, that cooperation between these developers that, of course, you don't want to build very large facilities in these utilities that are being challenged to serve that load, working with them very early on is what I'd like to see.
Collaboration, I like it. How about you, Elise?
I think, yeah, a statewide tariff would be great to get in California. So kind of everyone's on equal playing field, and we have venue shopping or forum shopping going on as much.
Municipalities, including the munis?
I mean, that's going to be hard to do, right?
CAISO-wide?
CAISO-wide would be great. I don't know how we'd accomplish that. But at least if it's, all the investor and utilities as a start, and then maybe the munis can follow if, we have a good tariff. And I know nobody shouldn't be using the word tariff, huh? Good rate.
Right.
Good rate schedule for them. Yeah. Electric service tariff is what I mean. And I think that's good for the data centers too, because then they're not having to go in and negotiate every term. They know the terms going in and kind of know what they're going to get and what to expect. And then hopefully, that whole negotiation period can be a lot quicker and we don't have to spend as much time. The other thing I'd like to see is start planning some renewable projects to serve this load and, making sure we're ready and we don't have to keep running, especially coal-fired plants, but our older gas-fired plants. We know it takes a long time to get big renewables out there, and so start planning and working on that now.
Get those renewables permitted and built. Absolutely. What about you, Skyler?
This will probably echo what David said, but it was what came to mind for me is like mutual understanding. All of the entities involved in power generation and consumption have different constraints, different goals and objectives. But I think in general, we are all in this together in terms of the environmental impact and the bottom line economics of growth. And the more we can understand what are the constraints that others are trying to work within, the more we can design solutions that are mutually beneficial and meet the needs of everyone.
Yeah. This kind of dialogue has been great. I've learned a lot already from you all. How about you, Gillian?
Yeah, a couple thoughts. I think one, I'd love to see some more flexibility in the load. I think you could open up a solution set if you had more flexibility. And two, I think if we rely on the current state of California planning processes to build new projects where the CEC comes up with a load forecast, and then they tell the CPUC, who comes up with some portfolios, and then they give it to the CAISO, and they come up with a transmission portfolio plan, and then we go to the commission and we say, here's the wires we're supposed to build because the CAISO told us, and the commission says, well, I think we need some more analysis on that, and we need to take another look at that. It's like, wait, but it came from the portfolio that you sent to them, and my own company too. I mean, we're not moving at rocket pace to interconnect these things. So some kind of breakthrough is required in this very lengthy and sometimes glacially paced procurement and build. And so looking for all of your ideas on breakthrough there.
Yeah, the need for speed. We have a 140-year-old industry that is regulated.
Doesn't usually move that fast.
And then we've got the fastest moving, most transformative industry of our lifetimes kind of colliding together. That is the challenge. Well, I want to give a big thank you to our panelists. Thank you so much for your great answers and questions. Thank you for sticking with us here. And now I do want to turn it over to questions. Please be sure to tell us your name and affiliation when you ask a brief question. Who have I got?
Hello, good evening. My name is Max Pfeiffer, CTO of Vauxhall Energy. We're focusing on self-contained solar and storage on site. I'm curious if you guys have a number in your mind that represents the breakover point for storage cost and solar, as we've seen the price of storage and solar drop and now the demand cost for energy go up with these scales. Like, do you guys have a sort of figure in mind, like $1 per megawatt hour, $1 per kilowatt number that you work around?
It's varied based off of geography, I would say, but I don't have one singular. I don't know if you use that.
Yeah, I don't either.
Do you feel like we're close, or do you feel like we're far?
Getting closer all the time.
Yeah, I like that response. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah. Here.
Eric Munsing, previously at Tesla Auto Bidder. Question building off of the last PG&E note, but like if you could wave a magic wand, what are the spots that stick in the regulatory or permitting landscape that we really need to unblock, because otherwise people will just build natural gas or fire up coal plants? Like XAI built in 4 months running off of an old natural gas tap. If that's the speed that we're competing against and it takes us years to build solar, this is not going to be a green wave.
Yeah, I'm thinking through kind of the question there. Maybe I'll try to clarify. You're asking a bit around like what is the time to market that's required?
Like, what do we need to change about the permitting? Is this a FERC issue? Is this a CPUC issue? Is it CEC? Is it utility? Like,
Why does it take so long to build and develop renewables
All of
when
the
you
above.
can cite a gas recip engine tomorrow and you can power XAI with 400 megawatts of distributed gas, essentially car engines?
When people go to Texas, like, why would people build in California if they can go to Texas with less people?
Yeah, I'll talk about that a little bit. I think one of the biggest challenges that the industry currently faces, and David talked about it a little bit, in terms of like the speculative nature of some data centers, it's really challenging as a developer or an operator if you can't get an answer on feasibility for 6 to 9 months for an interconnect study. Do you spend money that you're not sure it will go anywhere? Do you wait 9 months for an actual like certainty around the availability of power at a site? And so I think that's obviously one of the big challenges, outside of the fact that there's still more uncertainty throughout the development process, being at like local stakeholder involvement and feedback. And then we throw in things like tariffs coming at the federal level, and all of those create, challenges where there's a lack of certainty, which if you can do something fast enough, you can remove some of the uncertainty. Where if you plan something for 8 years down the road, 8 years from now, a lot will have changed, certainly, and especially in the face of AI and the development of chipsets. NVIDIA is coming out with new hardware every year or 18 months. So the evolution there is moving so fast that the uncertainty is a really big challenge.
Maybe just to add on to Skyler, I used to have an old colleague that would say, data center years are like dog years. I mean, it's just kind of like, 8 years to get something approved in the data center world is like a lifetime, right? And so the technology changes, the demand signals change, the IT requirements change. And so, it may kind of sound simplistic to say, but it's just easier to build in places like Texas right now. And I don't have the full knowledge to kind of go through the stack of the agencies of why that is. But you kind of point to those crypto miners that were able to turn into data center developers. That happened in, all over West Texas, but it's not really happening in anywhere else in the country, so to speak. So I think, some of the ease of developing in some of these places with the available resources and workforce, it just makes it easier to develop in a place like Texas.
I would just add, like, from our math, roughly speaking, like a megawatt of a base load asset takes roughly 5 to 7 megawatts of solar plus storage to match the same thing. So if you're only building clean in California, which is basically what's happening, you need a lot of land to create, and permitting, everything just gets exponentially more complicated because your footprint is large. So, you know, breakthrough in baseload clean resources is really needed if we're going to try to speed up the, you know, the build. And, you know, that, like I said, I don't see that coming in the next 5 years for sure, but after that, it could be better.
And I know California policymakers are taking a hard look at permitting reform and interconnection timelines and looking for ways to streamline that. But it is a challenge across, you know, a known challenge. Any other questions from the audience? Let's go right here. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. Oh, sorry. My name's Jenny. I work at PG&E on data center demand forecasting.
You should get
No, definitely not. I wanted to go back to the topic of load flexibility a little bit. So it's my understanding that data centers are built with backup generation, typically diesel generators. And I'm wondering if that has been discussed as an option for load flexibility during peak hours. And if so, how do customers react to using those resources? And if not, what needs to change for that to be part of the conversation?
Yeah, I can speak to that one a bit. When it comes to using backup diesel generators for like shaving the load, I guess in that case, in my review, it becomes a emissions problem. That the way that the generators are sited and calculated from emissions permitting perspective, they're only intended to be used a very few number of hours each year based upon kind of the generator upkeep. Or in the case of a grid declared emergency, then they can come online. But using them to just augment the power was never part of the environmental considerations for the site and becomes an obstacle to using them in that capacity.
Yeah, agree with Skyler. And, you know, there are new technologies that are being developed for backup that may open up that possibility. So things like, you know, BESS for backup has been explored a lot. In my time at Microsoft, I worked on a hydrogen fuel cell program for backup. Unfortunately, the hydrogen industry is kind of, you know, where it's at right now. But there are some, you know, I would say promising technologies that could turn data centers into more, I would say, grid interactive assets and also give them the ability to go off the grid at times. But Skyler mentioned it wasn't really ever thought of as a way to use diesel generators for that, at least.
Great question. I think somebody else had the microphone. Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, my name's Josh. I'm a developer at Fervo Energy, geothermal developer. Kind of around the discussion of overbuild and preventing overbuild, what are the type of terms or durations that these hyperscalers are looking to sign for these data center contracts? Is it because it seems like, you know, if they're willing to commit to longer terms, it could create more long-term alignment with the utility as they look to build out these costs. Is there a hesitancy around signing longer than 5-year agreements? And if so, why is that?
Sure. No, what I think I see most commonly in the industry is that short term, like availability, is still obviously like, you know, the time to market discussion that we've had. For longer term of contract for power offtake, but also from like leasing, there's not a huge hesitancy for longer terms because, you know, if you're going to you know, build a data center, invest the billions of dollars of capex there, then you're going to need power to come from somewhere. I think the decisions or the question around it sometimes comes back to the fixed nature of the pricing of power. It can be a double-edged sword in terms of if you lock in a long-term price based upon market fluctuation, that it's a great thing or it's not a great thing. I think that's where the consideration usually goes to.
Go back to those dog years. 5 years is a lifetime.
Yeah.
What do you think, David?
Yeah, I don't see much of a hesitance on longer term contracts. And really, you know, when data centers are being built, they're not being built to operate for 5 years, right? They're really 15, 20 plus years. Now, the internals, the chips, the GPUs, they get refreshed and swapped out, you know, in a couple of years. But a lot of that, like balance of plant infrastructure is there. And, you know, look at it at like 15-year kind of depreciation tables, right? So I particularly haven't seen much of a hesitance on that side.
Yeah, question back, and we'll just do a couple more and then wrap it up. So, yep.
Hey, I work for a company called Canon Energy, and one of the things we do is develop projects for data centers. But we're just pretty early in this process. And when we talk to data center developers, they all say they want a gig, they want access to 1 gig. And I want to get your thoughts on that. Is that actually realistic? What's the real number on a minimum level you're actually looking for versus what you aspire?
Can start off. I mean, I think yeah, it's very difficult to build like a gig of data center at once, right? It's typically a phased approach. So depending on who the company is, they'll typically have like a certain building block that they're looking at as the floor, right? So, you know, hyperscaler X has a 50 megawatt data center design, so they want at least 50 megawatts to start off, but they'll ask for a gig because they want to expand it over time. And that's typically how data centers have been built in the past, is almost kind of in modular blocks over time. So you get a gig of power that may be available in 5 years, but then you have like a phased approach of how you would then develop that data center over time, and then how much of the electric capacity that data center would take over time. So I think the answer is kind of like, we don't know yet, because nobody's taking a gig at one campus yet. But that seems to be the trend, right? Of being able to secure a very large amount of power at a campus site, and then be able to have you know, kind of control your own destiny in a way, and be able to build the data centers on the timeline that you want to build them.
All right. Last question. Okay, 2 more questions. We're here and then there, and then we'll wrap.
Hi, Santa
Oh, sorry. We'll do front first, and then she can pass you the mic. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I was realizing you're both in the same line of sight. So.
We are. That point was for both of us. Hi, thank you guys so much for this session so far. And yeah, my name is Sierra Stevens, and I work at Boston Consulting Group and their energy group. And I think for me, I just know that one of the biggest issues right now is obviously, you know, there's the permitting of the new clean energy projects, as well as the queue lengths. And so I'm wondering, you know, if hyperscalers from the get-go were to bring behind the meter projects, could we see potential leniency with regulators as well as utilities that could result in like a decreased time to power for these data centers, and therefore also a premium as well for the developers that they're working with?
Are they bringing their own behind the meter resources already?
I mean, so I'll say so there's an industry conference called Data Center Dynamics, and the last 2 years in the New York conference, the theme has been bring your own power. Like quite literally, BYOP, bring your own power. So I'm not even kidding, that was the theme. But so yes, there's absolute benefit to that. Like kind of we were talking before, working in cooperation with the utility and being able to bring generation with load often lessens the impact on the system when it's sited. I just don't think we've seen it a ton yet, because it really hasn't been much of an issue until the last couple of years. And so you know, there was one project in the Pacific Northwest where they were looking at using fuel cells for prime power, and project didn't move forward for one reason or the other, likely cost. But it's definitely something that I think would, you know, benefit both data center developers as well as the utilities when they're working together.
And yeah, great question. And I guess precedent that I have seen that would trend that direction is self-building substations. Where in discussions, you might get feedback that it's going to take 3 or 4 years to come online with the utility for a substation for distribution. And you can say, well, what if we do it in 18 months? And then we'll lease it back from you or whatnot. So.
Okay, last question. Yeah.
Hi. Sandra Brusso with PG&E as well. Hi, Sandra Brusso with PG&E on the Net Zero San Jose team. And I had a question actually about cooling of data centers. And so we talked a little bit about efficiency in the compute and how that could be more efficient over time. But cooling is certainly another energy load for data centers. And I was wondering how much advances in different cooling technologies have helped reduce data center load, and how much that could have an impact in the future.
Yeah, great last question. I could spend 30 minutes on data center cooling alone.
All right.
Yeah.
Go get a drink now.
Cut me off. But yeah, to your question, advancements have happened quite a bit with cooling over the last 10 years. Data centers have really focused on a metric called PUE, or PUE basically is any power used for cooling from the data center perspective was secondary to how much they could funnel to the IT. So that created a natural incentive to optimize around very efficient, primarily adiabatic cooling systems inside of data centers. But of the last 12 months, NVIDIA's GPU systems are now requiring liquid cooling, which is both a huge opportunity, but also a massive transition, where there is great opportunity in efficiencies of those liquid cooling systems. Things like heat reuse are now easier than they used to be when you were cooling from air. But it's also just kind of shaking the industry at this time of huge growth and change, which is absolutely a challenge.
Yeah, I would just say I see it as a CapEx trade-off right now. Right now, you can build more water-efficient data centers, but it just costs more to do it. And so I think as those costs come down, more companies will build those. And I think certain areas of the country and the world are going to drive that change as well. You can't get the amount of water you need to use evaporative cooling in Phoenix, Arizona, for example. And so that's just going to drive innovation. If power is available in these areas, land is available, the data center industry will find a way to become more efficient, is my opinion.
Well, that's a positive note to end on. Thank you so much to our panelists. I've learned a huge amount, and you guys have just been a wealth of knowledge.
Learned a lot from you.
Please feel free to stay. We've got some drinks and hors d'oeuvres over here. I know there were some unanswered questions, so you find the panelists and ask them offline. And thanks again for coming. And I know it's quite warm in here, sitting through the heat. Yeah, we need some liquid cooling. So thank you.